Moving on with our sessions, we will now go over deploying a Palo Alto VM-Series Firewall. I will start with a quick overview of requirements for the deployment. Next, we will go over the different deployment options, something that we will need to configure as we decide to install our firewall in the cloud. Some of those options will be mandatory, some of them will be optional, to finally see how to perform a full deployment in the Google Cloud. I will be showing you the configuration as we go through the session. The first thing I want to discuss for the deployment is going to be licensing. Licensing is important because it is going to eventually control the deployment, I would say, procedure. Two types of licenses we have available are bring your own license, BYOL, and pay as you go, PAYG. The main difference is that with the BYOL license, I would say the main advantage of this solution is that you will be able to deploy pretty much any single Palo Alto VM-Series image you want, regardless of the operating system version, regardless of the actual license that you will want to use for this image. This is all going to be controlled by your administrator or by yourself. Now, the idea here is that with BYOL, we will need to have a license in place, which means that we will have to purchase it from a Palo Alto Networks partner, maybe a reseller. So we've got a license in place and we want to use it for the cloud deployment. In this case, we kind of like pay in advance. We purchase a license first and then move on and use this license as we do the deployment. Another method, the second method, pay as you go, is a different approach in a way that in this case, our license is going to come along with the firewall image. The license is going to be bundled or just included along with the image, which means that we don't even have to have that image in our disk because the image is going to be taken directly from Google Cloud Marketplace. Google Cloud Marketplace is a special platform that offers access to different images coming from different vendors, provided by different vendors, that you can install in the cloud. And in case of Palo Alto Networks VM-Series Firewall, this is a, well, as the name implies, it's a paid license in a way that you pay as for the actual usage. So it uses the usage-based billing approach. I believe that Palo Alto Networks is going to charge you on a per-hour basis. But a good thing is that they give you a trial, 30-day trial to start. So during the first 30 days, you will not have to pay them unless you really cross the resources allocated and the default limits that they included in the trial. One of the drawbacks here is that you can only use the version that Palo Alto Networks offers at the time. So a certain version of the operating system, and you cannot use an earlier version or maybe a newer version if there is one. There is always going to be that version that is provided by Palo Alto Networks to Google Cloud, which is typically going to be a recent release that is really well patched. So something that typically is going to do the job. Now, more information about the licenses can be found in the documentation. We will get back to the different VM-Series models in just a second, but let's now take a look at VM-Series model license types. And let's take a look at firewall licenses for public clouds. That's the place you want to look at if you're still struggling with which license to choose. Notice that there are going to be actually two types of, it says three types. Three types of licenses is what it says, available in the cloud, bundle 1, bundle 2, and bundle 3. I believe that as of right now, there is going to be just 2 bundles available. The difference between the bundles is that bundle 1, which is what I'm going to use, is what includes threat prevention in addition to the base functionality of the firewall, versus the second bundle, it extends the feature set capabilities with Global Protect, URL filtering, Wildfire, and DNS security. Then the third bundle, they also mention it includes advanced threat prevention and advanced URL filtering. Okay, pay-as-you-go is going to be my choice. I don't have an image. I want to get everything from the cloud, and I want to pay for the actual usage and not for the full license up front. In terms of the platform choices, the main thing to remember about is that we want to select a virtual machine, a type that supports at least 3 interfaces. The marketplace deployment requires the firewall to use at least 3 interfaces, one for management, one as the public network, and one as the private network. So we've got this management interface on trust, external public interface, if you will, and then private/internal interface on the workload side. Okay, this means that any type of machines that support less than 3 interfaces, actually in case of Google Cloud, it's going to be 2, 4, 8, so you will not see a machine with just 3. You will need to select a version that comes either with 2 or 4 interfaces. So this kind of like simplifies things because it tells us that any machine like N1/standard/2 is not going to work because, as I said, the bare minimum here is going to be to have 4 interfaces. And this is why the recommended instant machine types for the host, they include at least 4 interfaces. We can have more. So these are our choices. That's the first thing, the number of interfaces. Again, this is for the marketplace deployment, which is pay as you go. That's the requirement. And another one is that allocating more CPUs than the actual virtual machine model supports is not gonna help. This is the second thing to remember about. Now, for this to really understand, we need to know that depending on the virtual machine type we select for the deployment, this is also gonna automatically affect the firewall virtual machine model, like 100 versus 300 versus 700. So the more resources we have on the host, the Palo Alto software is going to automatically detect that and will select the highest capable VM model that is going to work on the underlying virtual machine. So if we go for N2-standard-16, it is going to figure out that it has a lot of CPUs, it has a lot of memory, so it's going to deploy VM700. If we go for N2-standard-4, this one here, it is going to install VM100 model. Of course, the models, they affect the performance of the instance. So it's all about the number of sessions, security roles, zones, IPsec, tunnels. We see the differences like between VM100 and VM700 here. Obviously, if you want to test this solution, VM100 is going to be more than what you may need. Right, so we've got 4 interfaces at least for the pay-as-you-go deployment, and the other one is those CPUs. Just don't allocate more than what the model supports. For instance, if VM100 is set to use 2 CPUs, you don't want to give it 3 or 4 because it's not going to use anything what's above. So ideally, just try to configure a virtual machine that is going to kind of like match this table to find the right equivalent, because allocating more CPUs again is going to be a waste of resources. The software is not going to use them. The Google Cloud supports a couple methods of authentication, but for the deployments of the VM-Series Palo Alto Networks Firewall from the marketplace, the only method that we can use to get access to the command line, so via SSH, is going to be a key-based authentication. And because of that, the first thing that we will want to do before we start the deployment is going to be to generate an RSA key pair that matches the Open SSH standard. So any type of Open SSH key generator that's available is going to be sufficient for this step. If this is Windows machine, I would say use PuTTY-Gen or maybe an online generator. For Linux, Mac devices, you can use SSH-Keygen tool or an online solution, online website, like if we were to say Open SSH key generator, just Keygen. And maybe let's also mention online, like this one here. Okay, just pick RSA, then the key size, and we see that it nicely gives us the actual keys. So this is what we will need to, as we will see, paste to the as we do the deployment as one of the options. So I would say you copy this to a text file versus the private key. You can make it a PM. So just copy to a text file and then change the extension to PM. Or if you want to use PuTTY as the client, which is going to be my case, you will need to convert PM to the PPK, I believe, as extension, because PPK is what PuTTY is going to take. And you can do this using an online tool or just load, I think, the public key to the PuTTY-Gen, and then this way it's going to figure out what's the private key, or maybe it's actually the opposite. You load the private key and then it's going to figure out the public. But either way, it's going to give you an option to save the private key as with the PPK extension. But PPK extension, again, for PuTTY, a PM should also work for other clients. The thing is that what you will copy when you perform the deployment is going to be the public key. And we will actually take a look at this in just a second. Before I show you this in action, let me quickly mention that this information, the public key, is going to be put as the instance metadata. We just want to make sure that we prefix the key, the whole key, with this string admin://RSA, and then put a space, which is going to be followed by the public key. I'm going to show you this in just a second. Now, if there is going to be a problem with the key, remember that the only option to start over is going to be to delete the deployment and create it from scratch. This is a critical step because if you mess with the key and something's wrong with the public or private key, you put a space in a place where you shouldn't, or you just change one of the characters of the public key. This is going to break the authentication process, and you will never be able to access the command line. Okay, there is documentation that shows this procedure. In general, the Palo Alto VM-Series documentation for the cloud is documented under the setup the VM-Series Firewall on Google Cloud Platform document, set of documents. So you may want to take a look at this over here. We take a look at prepare and then go down to prepare to deploy. Scroll down a little bit to SSH Keeper. They also show you this over here. They show an example with PuTTY key generator, how you can copy. But this portion here is kind of like slightly confusing because you use the admin at two places. This is actually something that shows what you should see. A one-liner here under SSH key with the whole key. But we will again, I will show you this in action. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at that in our cloud infrastructure. Okay, I mentioned that I want to use a pay-as-you-go deployment. So first thing, we will go to the marketplace and try to find the right image. Now in the marketplace, I'm gonna filter by, I will go to security to slightly narrow down the scope of the different options, images, and we will just say Palo Alto Networks in the filter, and then look for the VM-Series Next Generation Firewall, but not the BYOL. We want to look for the bundles. Bundle 1 is going to be sufficient. In my case, the trial is active. You would normally get, as I said, 30 days to test everything. We will now launch. At this stage, if you're doing this for the first time, it may ask you to enable a bunch of APIs, which you should do to proceed with the deployment. We've got the command line option, we've got the deployment manager, which is what I'm going to use. We will call it GCP PAN-FW PAYG, for instance, maybe 1. We see that actually it gives us a couple options for the version, but I'm gonna choose the default option. We will deploy this under US East, and we need to select a zone. Let's go for US East 1D, for instance. So I'm sticking to the US East 1 region with the VPCs and then the deployment. General purpose, I would say that if you just wanna test, leave these. Leave the defaults. It says it's gonna use 4 CPUs, 16 gigs of memory. We will use 4 interfaces, which is perfectly fine for us. The most important portion of this configuration is gonna be the SSH key. A quick reminder, you guys don't forget to subscribe to our website's newsletter and YouTube channel for the latest updates on products, industry news, and promotions. Thanks. Okay, so I'm gonna first copy my public key from a text file. I'm gonna delete this. We will leave admin colon and then paste the public key. We've got a one-liner, and we should see the admin is followed directly by RSA, SSH-RSA, and then a single space. This is my public key. I've got the corresponding private key in a file, PPK file. We will use it in just a second. Okay, boot disk, the minimum number for the disk is 60 gigs. I'm gonna leave it. And now another important thing is gonna be to configure the allocate networks to firewall interfaces. And what's confusing here is that they show us a couple network interfaces network interfaces options, and in my opinion, they don't really tell us exactly which of these is going to correspond to what interface on the firewall side. Now, one thing you can use to figure that out is going to be to hover your mouse over the interface swap option. The interface swap is something that you will enable if you perform this deployment with the aid of load balancers, because load balancers, they have certain requirements as for which NIC, network interface card on the firewall, is going to be used as management interface versus untrust port. So interface swap is only needed when you deploy this along with load balancers. Not our case, but this option gives us a hint that says default NIC 0 is the management versus first data plane NIC, which is NIC 1, well, is the untrust port, or just untrust VPC. Okay, so this is NIC 0, this network interface. This is NIC 0. This second network interface from the top is NIC 1. And then we have another one which is NIC 2. You could also add more, like NIC 4, NIC 3, NIC 4, for additional data plane interfaces, like if you want to do multi-interface deployment with multiple private VPCs. To make it clear, this first interface is going to refer to the management port and management VPC. This is going to be for the untrust VPC, and the other one is for the trust VPC, let's say 1 and down to, I believe, 7. If you go for more. Okay, this means that when I select my networks, I want to start with the management VPC over here. I want to choose the management subnet 10. We see this is 10.100.100.0/24. This is my management. I also want to enable an external IP address for this interface. Maybe let's quickly take a look at this on the slide as well. Okay, once we finish the deployment and we will eventually want to test, we will also need to upload the private key to our SSH client. But we will get back to this when we test connectivity. Now, in terms of interfaces, as I mentioned, the order is going to be critical. What we've done so far is that we allocated the management VPC to the first interface of the firewall, which is going to be the management port on the Palo Alto network side. Okay, so this NIC 0 in the cloud goes to management interface on the Palo Alto networks firewall, like that. And this is what we need to obviously control the firewall via the GUI or SSH. This is also what Panorama is gonna access if we want to centralize management. And this interface and this VPC in this way is also what the firewall is going to use to access external services like DNS, software updates, licensing, stuff like that. Okay, this tells me that depending on the design, I may want to allocate a public address to this management port. Like if I don't have an internal Panorama system located somewhere on-prem that would normally connect to the firewall's private address via, let's say, VPN. And if I were to stick to the private address, I would also have to enable NAT in the cloud so I can access those external services. This is one option if you want to stick to the private address on the management interface. Of course, the second option is to go public, which way you will be able to connect to the firewall via the internet, from the internet, and you will be able to access the different services without using NAT. Okay, let's make it clear, assuming that this is my management interface that is connected to my firewall. This is gonna be part of the management VPC. If I make it public, I can go out to the internet directly without any net, and also I can manage this instance from the internet. Versus if I go for the private interface, if I want to go out, like over here, I want to use CloudNet on the Google side to change this private to public. But if I have, let's say that this is going to be a VPN connection to the cloud and then on-prem, and my panorama is over here, this is going to be sufficient to manage the firewall. So two options, depending on the design. I'm going to go public because I don't have an on-prem network connected. I don't run panorama in my enterprise. This is not a hybrid setup. Public address is going to be needed in my case. Also, so I can access the firewall, and this is why I'm leaving the enable external IP for NIC 0 interface option enabled. Okay, the untrust interface NIC 1 on the cloud side, which goes to, I believe it's going to be Ethernet 1/1 on the firewall side. This is what represents our external subnet. And this typically needs a public address so we can reach the internet, and possibly so that the internet can reach us if we want to expose some of the internal devices to the public network. And then the last is going to be the trust VPC or VPCs. So our internal subnet or internal subnets, this is what goes to ETH1/2 and above. Okay, at the end, we will also want to make sure that those addresses, the addresses that we will allocate on the VM side are static, so they don't change. We will get back to this later in this or another session. Okay, to finish, go back to interfaces. The second one from the top is gonna be my untrusted interface, my public interface. So I'm gonna choose FW untrust VPC with this 10.20.20 subnet. Done. Use public address. And the third one is my private zone. So I'm gonna use the private subnet 10.2.20/24. No public address is needed on the internal interface. The inside is something that we want to protect from the internet. Okay, we also have a bunch of so-called bootstrap options, which is optional. This is going to apply to what is known as bootstrapping. Maybe before I discuss this, let's quickly click on deploy. And see if everything goes fine. Bootstrapping is a method of pre-configuring our firewall so when it boots up, for the first time, it has some configuration in it. Because remember that by default, if you don't provide those different bootstrapping options, the brand new firewall, out of the market firewall, it comes with the factory default configuration and the software the software operating system that is listed under the marketplace. It doesn't know anything about Panorama. It doesn't have any IP addresses on interfaces and so on. So you could obviously perform this initial configuration manually, which is what we will do in our next session. But as an alternative, you can go for bootstrapping, which is a method of making sure that the firewall is gonna get some basic configuration to at least to start. So for instance, it can at least communicate with our Panorama system. And the two bootstrapping options available are basic configuration and full configuration. Now basic configuration, just complete configuration. Now basic configuration is what we can use to license and register the firewall with our Panorama device, which can be provided, this basic configuration can be provided through the GCP metadata, the fields we just saw under the deployment during before we started installation. Or as an alternative, we can go for the init-cfg.txt file, or we can list this metadata inside. So you can either configure this when you do the deployment here via the manager, or you can provide it as a file. Now, complete configuration is different in a way that in addition to providing the licenses and registration information, the firewall is also going to come up with the full config. So we will install a configuration snapshot, or basically any type of other configuration we may have we want to install on the firewall. We will make sure the firewall has the latest content updates, possibly plugins, that the software version is up to date, and so on. And complete configuration is provided by a full Bootstrap package. So in the previous case, we were talking about the basic Bootstrap package with the file or just the GCP metadata. With complete bootstrapping, the package is going to consist of the init-cfg.txt file like in the previous case, plus the bootstrap.xml file with the configuration and other options. Okay, the bootstrapping can be performed, as you can tell, using different methods. It comes with a certain amount of configuration, additional configuration steps, like for instance, uploading the Bootstrap package to the Google Cloud storage so that the firewall can download the package. And this is documented under Bootstrap the VM-Series Firewall. I would also take a look at maybe the Bootstrap package. So in case of Google Cloud, storage bucket is what's available to store this information. You can basically take a look at these documents to figure out what is going to be the structure of these two files and also how to create them. Okay, as an alternative, when you go back to choose a Bootstrap method, you could stick to the Google Cloud metadata. For instance, to tell it what's the DNS, you would use this metadata during the installation. Okay, if we now go back to the firewall instance, a quick way to tell if we are successful is going to be to click on the instance name at the bottom here. Actually, we see that it shows us the green sign with the OK icon. So it's going to tell us we are good to go. One thing I would focus on would be my one of the metadata here, the SSH keys key for the metadata. The value should match our public key, which I believe it does. This is exactly what I pasted from my text file. Okay, one more thing, maybe let's also go to compute engine and then choose VM instances. We should see an instance here, which we do. So maybe let's also quickly hardcode the IP addresses so they don't change when we stop and possibly start the deployment, start the instance again. As I mentioned, hard coding those is going to be needed also for the firewall, just to make sure that the firewall is always going to use the same set of IP addresses on its interfaces. Okay, so go click on the instance. And this actually, maybe let's click on one of the interfaces. Okay, this time it might be actually under IP addresses. Go back, let's go to VPC network and then IP addresses. Okay, so this is another thing that confirms the deployment. We've got a bunch of internal IP addresses and 2 external IP addresses, one for the management and one for the untrust VPC. So I want to quickly make sure that these will not change. I'm going to click on under actions and say promote to static. Let's call it inside. This is FW trust. I'm going to call it inside reserve. Then this one I'm going to call outside. Just a name for the reservation. And this is going to be my management. Okay, the same for external addresses, especially management. And one more outside public, like that. Right, this way we can be sure that those IP addresses will not change on the VM, and as we will see this way also on the firewall side, because we will use the GCP for the allocation. Even though technically we could use reconfigure those addresses to be static and then hardcode them, perm them. So no matter what is going to happen in the data plane, management plane, our firewall is going to keep using the same IP addresses. Now in our next session, we will see how to connect to the firewall and initialize it so we can eventually test our deployment.
You guys don't forget to subscribe if you like our content. Thanks!